everybody, and welcome back to the Fern Fam Instagram channel. We finally finished up the restoration portion of the van build, so if you want to check that out, look at episodes 1 through 8, and today we're moving on to the inside of the van. We're starting out by grinding out some of the rust that was on the floorboards. And basically there was no crazy, terrible rust. It was all just surface rust, a little bit where the paint had got scratched and it rusted there. So really all stuff that we really just cleaned up with the wire wheel and then put a white coat of paint over it. And there were actually places, all the golden color places that you see inside the van, that's where there are holes going through it. So the floor was riveted in, and when the Red Cross before us, who owned the van before us, used the van, they drilled massive half-inch holes in the bottom to mount something. So we used metallic bonding silicone to fill in those holes, and we painted over them to keep them from rusting during the restoration process, because that whole process took a couple of months and we didn't want any more rust than there already was. So we cleaned out the van with the wire wheel, then sprayed it out with the air hose, wiped down a couple of the places with acetone that were really dirty, and then started on with the white paint. And basically we decided to only do the floor because it was really the worst section. Eventually there were a couple places in the roof where there was a little bit of rust, and I'd like to sand the wheel welds and paint those as well, just to make sure that they're completely sealed. And we are planning on using spray foam in order to get a good insulation in and to help seal up some of the places on the van that we might have missed during the bodywork phase or when we're doing the painting on the floor here. So really, we probably could have gotten away without painting it, but in order to make sure that we didn't have any places that we weren't suspecting, we really went ahead and just made sure we were covering all of our bases. I mean, the can of Rust-Oleum paint was $9, so it was definitely worth it, and it only took about probably 30 minutes to paint the floor of the van. So it really, like I said, didn't have to do it, but it was one of those steps that it was inexpensive and quick to do, so we felt like we might as well go ahead and get that done. And it turned out, made the van look a whole lot better really fast. Although it did make the van smell for a while. I was unable to drive it for a little while just because the smell was pretty overpowering once all the paint cured. But fortunately, that step's done, and now we're moving on past the painting part. I'm sure there'll be many more rounds of paint to come, but the next step that we were doing is installing a backup camera. So in some of the previous episodes, I believe the very first van build episode, we go through the aftermarket radio that we installed. We put in a Alpine head unit that has a 9-inch touchscreen display, and it also has the capability of having a backup camera wired to it. So we also purchased an Alpine backup camera, which we'll put the link to both of those items in the description below. And if you're looking at buying one for a T1N van, they will say that it will not fit, but it will if you buy a single din cage to go around it and bend the tabs to make it work. So it's fitting in our van and it works great. It's an awesome radio. I would put it in again if I had to. So we're getting the wiring done here. Basically, I pulled the reverse sense wire all the way back to the driver's side tail light, and I'm also pulling the power for the camera off of the tail light. So you can see here, this is the tail light pulled out. It's basically got metal tracks that run to all the lights. One of them is a ground, and one of them is power to each section of the lights. It's a real simple design, and all I did was have Lauren crank the van up, figure out which lights come on for reverse and which lights are on all the time. On T1N Sprinters, as you can see here, when you crank up the van, the lights automatically come on. They're not controllable. It's when the engine's running, the lights are on. So I use that constant 12-volt power to supply voltage to the camera. So a little closer look here, we use the white wire with a red stripe to give the backup signal to our radio, and we use the brown wire as the ground for the camera power, and we use the gray wire with the black stripe for the 12-volt signal to the camera to power it on. And like I said, that's the real simple light, just basically a butt splice connection with some heat shrink over it, and then we pulled all the wires back where we needed them to. And also, if your van doesn't have daytime running lights, you can always find another constant source of ignition power at the back of your van. A lot of times, like the interior lights will be on the ignition circuit. Basically, just use a multimeter, fire up or turn ignition on in your van, and check and see if you have 12 volts. That's really all I did to make sure that the camera would be on. And the reason I didn't wire the camera on just when I was in reverse is in case I'm running down the interstate and want to merge and can't see behind me, I can touch the touch screen and flip the camera on and basically see around the van. So in order to get the camera up on top of the van, we used a Newmar through-hole fitting. It's actually for marine applications. It's made to seal cables coming through decks of boats. So that's one thing. I work in the marine industry. I'm a design engineer for a marine engine company. So a lot of the things that are going into the van are marine grade. Like the sealant I'm using here is 3M 5200. It's marine grade sealant. I would swear by it. It has sealed everything and anything that I've ever wanted to seal with it. So if you'd like to find that or the through-hole fitting that we use, check the description below and there will be links to both of those if you want to use the same exact ones. So far, it looks like the combination of the wire size and the ability to fit the camera through it, all that, the through-hole fitting worked perfectly. It's a super easy install. Just went inside the van with a 3/4 inch hole saw, drilled a hole up through the roof, and then installed the through-hole fitting with 3 screws that hold it down. I did apply a little bit of sealant to those screws in order to make sure that they do not leak as well, because there is a gasket that goes around the bottom of the through-hole fitting, but it doesn't seal the screws that penetrate the actual van. So I elected to put more sealant on those and make sure they are sealed completely. And one thing that you'll find if you use an Alpine backup camera like we used is that the mounting bracket has to go through the wire itself. So you have to put the mounting bracket on first, which is a step that I missed in the installation. So I had to take apart the through-hole fitting that I just put together, pull the wire back out, and run the camera mount bracket through it in order to be able to mount the camera on the back of the van. And so basically, in order to mount the camera itself, we just used the bracket that came with it. It's got some 3M adhesive on the back of it and 4 little screws. So I just found the best location to have it angled down. I would like to have had it centered, but unfortunately the third brake light is right in the center of the roof, so I offset it one side to the passenger, and basically we'll just adjust the backup settings on the display of the head unit once we get where we can put the parking lines basically to get you centered in a parking space setup. But the bracket itself, super easy install, just 4 little Phillips head screws that hold it in, and then 2 little screws that hold the camera onto the bracket itself. So it was a super easy install. All in all, did this in under a day. It was probably 3 hours worth of work because I did a couple other things that day as well that we'll get to in the video later on. So between the head unit and the backup camera itself, it really came with everything that we needed for the install, except for the through-hole fitting and the extra wiring that we added in between, because obviously they're not intending for you to install this backup camera on a almost like 22.5-foot Sprinter van. So I got some 16 gauge stranded wire to make those runs to the back, and then I actually reused some of the leftover wiring from when we installed our S-Bar diesel heater and used the power wire for the fuel pump for that we had left over to run the power from the tail light up to the top of the van for the camera here. But aside from those items, everything came with the camera and the head unit. It was a really easy install, and I would definitely do it again if I could. I'm not used to having a backup camera. It's not something that my truck has, so this will actually be a step up from my daily driver here when I can actually see behind me in the van. Even though the van has the 2 back windows, you can kind of see through those, so it's not like super terrible, but it'll definitely be a safer option being able to see behind us when we're backing up. And like I said earlier, if we're going down the interstate, need to merge and want to be able to see what's behind the van, it's definitely a good safety feature to have on any van conversion. One step that we actually skipped in the video is we verified that the camera worked before I drilled any holes in the roof, because that's something I didn't want the van to be sitting there with a 3/4 inch hole in the roof, or either have to put the fitting in and then take it back apart if the camera didn't work. So hooked everything up, made sure that we were getting a signal to the head unit, and fortunately we were, so that's when we went ahead and started drilling holes in the roof, because there would be nothing worse than having a big 3/4 inch hole in the roof that had nothing to go in it for a couple weeks until we could get a camera that worked. So that's an important step that you definitely don't want to miss if you're installing a backup camera and plan on drilling through your roof to do so, or really drilling anywhere in the van to do so. One of the reasons we didn't put it in the back door is because of the way the power is transmitted through the back doors. It's the little touch plates basically, so we just chose to put the hole in the roof and mount it up there next to the third brake light. So cleaning up all the wiring, getting it all put back together, basically pulled all the slack. I ended up cutting some of the wiring and cleaned it up a little bit more once I pulled it back through, just so there would be less wire just coiled up in the inside of the van. The one wire that I couldn't really trim down was the video wire, because I had a set extension length, but all in all I think it's going to be fine. It'll probably just get covered up by the spray foam, and if we ever need to get to it, it will probably not be accessible, so we'll just have to run a new one if there's ever any problems with it. So the next thing that we did on the van was installed a roof track system. So we went to Proline Racks and ordered 2 of their rack kits in order to span the full length of the van. I guess on any other vehicle it would work fine to only have one of the kits. I actually made the mistake of ordering 4 of the kits because I thought I needed 4 pieces, but it turns out they come in sets of 2. So if you need any roof rails for your van, hit me up, and could definitely make something happen with the extra 2 sets that we have. But all in all, those are pretty easy install as well. They come with really detailed instructions, and we decided to add a little more sealant to the self-sealing screws that they send, because I just didn't want to take any chances with having leaks in our roof, because that would just cause even more problems down the road when there's water in the walls and you can't find where it's coming from and all that kind of stuff. So put some 3M 5200 on each screw as it went in, made sure it's sealed. The gasket underneath the rail, made sure it compressed down tightly. And even after all of that, I went back inside the van and basically just gooped 5200 on every screw that went through the roof. And it turns out we got lucky, and one of the screws in the rail actually caught the roof support. So that track is really never going anywhere. So we plan to use these to mount a roof rack system to it, and more than likely we'll probably attach our solar panels almost directly to these tracks in order to keep them as low profile as possible, unless we find that we want the roof rack look to extend the whole length of the van. That's something we really haven't finalized, the design of the roof rack. We know that we want to have 2 pretty large solar panels, I think 72 cell, maybe I think it's either 60 or 72 cell solar panels on the roof, so that's going to take up a lot of the real estate. But we do want to have a place to get up on top of the roof, maybe like a little deck area if there's enough room left, and definitely some storage up there for different things, snow skis, that kind of stuff. So the roof track system is one of those things we had to get it in before we spray foamed, because I didn't want to make any roof penetrations after we spray foamed. The only one that we'll do after spray foam is the box to allow our solar panel wiring to pass through, and that's going to be the only roof penetration. That and we'll frame out for the AC unit and the max air fan, but those won't have any spray foam in that cavity, so that won't be as big of an issue there. But basically we got the 4 tracks installed and all lined up, and the backup camera on the van, and it's ready for the next step of the inside of the build, which will be adding some studs onto the walls. So if you liked what you saw, hit that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments, make sure you drop those below and we'll get back to you. And if you're ready for more, hit that subscribe button. We'll be back next week with another episode.